Pope. There was one problem. He'd been dead for 9 months. You'd assume that medieval justice, however brutal, at least required the accused to be breathing, present, able to answer the charges. That seems like a pretty basic flaw for a courtroom. But in January of 897, Pope Stephen VI had the rotting corpse of his predecessor, Pope Formosus, hauled out of its tomb in St. Peter's Basilica. The body was dressed in full papal vestments, complete with the pallium and the tiara. It was propped upright in a chair facing a council of bishops. And then the trial began. Formosus stood accused of perjury and violating canon law. The specific crime: holding more than one bishopric during his career. He had been Bishop of Porto before becoming Pope, which was illegal under the rules of the early Church, rules the papacy itself usually bent when it was convenient. The prosecution called no living witnesses, presented no documents. A deacon stood behind the corpse to answer questions on its behalf, because a dead man can't exactly defend himself. When the court asked Formosus why he had usurped the papal throne while bishop of another see, the deacon stayed silent. The silence was taken as guilt. The verdict was unanimous. The sentence was swift and grotesque. All of Formosus's acts as pope were declared null and void, every ordination, every decree, every blessing he had ever given. Then they stripped the papal robes from the body and cut off the 3 fingers of his right hand, the fingers he had used to confer blessings. The corpse was dragged through the streets of Rome and dumped unceremoniously into the Tiber River. Now, if this were just a macabre curiosity, it would still be worth a raised eyebrow. But the Cadaver Synod wasn't the product of madness. It was the product of politics, of a factional war so bitter that it reached into the grave to keep fighting. Stephen VI owed his papal throne to the House of Spoleto, the powerful family of Duke Lambert and his mother Agiltrude. Formosus had angered them deeply by crowning a rival, Arnulf of Carinthia, as Holy Roman Emperor. Even after Formosus died of natural causes in April 896, that grudge didn't die with him. For Agiltrude, who was present at the trial and reportedly pressured the bishops to convict, the synod was a way to annul a rival's coronation and cripple the political networks Formosus had built. The legal annihilation of a dead man was just a tool. But the tool slipped. Because annulling every act of Formosus didn't just erase one coronation. It unraveled the entire clerical hierarchy he had touched. Every bishop Formosus had ordained, and there were many, suddenly found their ordinations invalid. That meant every priest those bishops had ordained was also invalid. In a cascade effect, thousands of sacraments, marriages, and last rites across Europe were now legally questionable. The Church hadn't just settled a political score. It had accidentally declared a continent-wide spiritual crisis. And the fallout didn't stay buried. That same year, 897, an earthquake damaged the Lateran Basilica, which many saw as divine judgment. Stephen VI was deposed by a mob, stripped of his papal insignia, and thrown into prison, where he was strangled. The next pope, Romanus, lasted only 4 months and likely annulled Formosus's condemnation, but we don't know for sure. Pope Theodore II, 9 months later, did annul it definitively. He had Formosus's body, which a fisherman had miraculously pulled from the Tiber, intact and reportedly already working wonders, reburied with full honours in St. Peter's. Trying to move on, the Church passed a law at the Lateran Synod of 898 explicitly banning the trial of any dead person. It was the legal equivalent of putting a "Do Not Exhume" sign on your tomb. Then the pendulum swung again. Pope Sergius III, another ally of the Spoleto family, took the throne in 904. He wasn't content to simply recondemn Formosus. He had the body exhumed a second time, beheaded, and tossed back into the Tiber. He then reaffirmed all the invalidations of Formosus's ordinations, forcing countless clergy to be reordained. Some priests had been ordained, then invalidated, then revalidated, then invalidated again, all while the same man's body was alternately revered as a saint and used as a prop in a macabre puppet show. For decades, the legitimacy of your local parish priest depended entirely on which faction currently controlled the Lateran Palace. The Church's legal memory became a palimpsest of contradictory verdicts, each one declared infallible until the next pope undid it. Here's the part that still echoes today. That chaos, the open wound of a pope being judged by his successors and found guilty posthumously, horrified canon lawyers for centuries. It became the ultimate cautionary tale. When the doctrine of papal infallibility was formally defined in 1870, it was in part to make absolutely sure that no future council could ever pull a Cadaver Synod again. The idea that a pope can err when speaking officially was sealed shut, precisely because the 9th century showed what happens when you start holding popes accountable after death. The whole edifice nearly collapses under the weight of retroactive nullifications. The most ridiculous trial in church history helped produce one of its most unshakable dogmas. So what was the final score? Stephen VI dug up a body to win an argument he was already having with a dead man. The corpse supposedly worked miracles and was re-venerated as a saint. And 12 centuries later, the legal shockwaves of that day in January 897 are still embedded in the architecture of the Catholic Church. The dead pope lost the trial, but he ended up shaping the papacy more than his executioner ever did. If you just learned that an entire religion's legal system was partly forged in the fallout of a zombie trial, consider sticking around. History has plenty more where that came from.